When I was a kid growing up in North Dakota, we were tempted to have an inferiority complex. I mean, it's a backwater state, it's small in population, it's flat, it's cold, no one's ever been to North Dakota. But I remember when, this is probably second or third grade, some kid on the playground said that if North Dakota seceded from the Union, it would be the third most powerful country on Earth. And to our little second and third grade minds, that was cool. But we had really no idea why. And we certainly didn't know who was making this power happen. Well, I'd like to introduce you to Major General Robert Parker. He's a two-star. He's a former head of the 20th Air Force, an expert on Soviet military, and a missileer.
Item 128, launcher closure door open. Item 129, first aid ignition to missile.
Proceed by function to item 131.
Item 131, roll maneuver number 1 complete.
You have a duty to your country. That doesn't mean you have to serve in a uniform, but you have a duty to serve in some capacity. It's your country, and your duty is to make it better. I think that patriotism is not a blind love of your country, but it's a respect for what your country stands for, our core values you hear so much about, and make sure we never lose sight of the values of why people live here and why people want to come here. I came in the 5th of July, 1963. Vietnam was starting to build up, so I knew I was going to have to come in one way or the other. Right after I got into the Air Force, I was at Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota, I got my draft notice. And somehow I tell the draft board that I was already in active duty, so I filled out the form. They said, report to Albany, New York for your induction physical, and any reason you shouldn't. I put no reason, signed it, Robert W. Parker, 2nd Lieutenant of the United States Air Force, and sent it back. Never was drafted. Did we think of nuclear war? We thought that, yes, we'd probably go to war with Cuba and obviously with Russians. And how extensive the war would be back then. You got to remember, I grew up during the Cold War where we practiced getting under your desk for fallouts. Neighbors built shelters in their backyard because they were worried. People stockpiled food. And it's also hard to remember, it was less than 20 years after the World War was over, World War II. So the conflict with the Russians was on people's mind a lot. And I think back then when you thought about nuclear war, it wasn't a limited, throw a couple missiles at each other. We were going to go to war, and it might be all-out war. The neat thing about Cold War, if there's such a thing, is you only had one enemy. You focused all your attention on Russia. China, for maybe a period later in the 70s and 80s, got to be a nuclear power. But Russia was the country that, or the USSR at the time, that you looked at.
I've heard this before, that the Cold War was really a stabilizing factor in the world. Do you agree with that?
In a way, I think it was for probably 25 years. When you think of MAD, mutual assured destruction, neither side would ever want to say, I started it. And as a matter of fact, my opportunities to go into Russia doing arms control inspections, I would talk to my counterparts that were young officers like I was, now they were generals, and they always had that same philosophy. We want the world to be safer and better for our grandchildren. They knew that they were through this period of time, but maybe through arms control inspections and things, the world would be better. So yeah, it was a very, it wasn't on your mind all the time, but you knew that when you have so many ICBMs and SLBMs and bombers on alert all the time, that if something happened, you'd be required to launch them. I ran what was called the U.S. On-Site Inspection Agency. So we're responsible for the implementation of the treaties. The political side did the treaties, Senate confirmed them, et cetera. Then once it was in a treaty, then my group would go in. So we did conventional forces, we did nuclear ICBMs, INFs, we did actually some chemical and some open skies. So all the treaties fell under the organization I ran. So the organization was actually the U.S. arm to make sure that the compliance was worked with. If we found something that wasn't in compliance, then we turned it over to the political side the President of the United States could make a démarche if he wanted to, saying you're violating this treaty. Fortunately, we never had to, as far as when I was there, ever had to do that. And one of the interesting things about it is that most of the original treaties limited the delivery vehicles, but not the weapons. You know, if you think of a Minuteman missile like this one right here, this is the delivery vehicle, okay? So you would eliminate how many you could have of those, but we didn't eliminate the reentry systems.
And they call this an RV?
The reentry vehicle, or in this case, when it was a MIRV, it was a reentry system. The original Minuteman, if I can just use these,
sure.
The Minuteman 1, the Minuteman system has not changed a whole lot as far as the structure. It's 3 stages. You have stage 1, and then it's called the interface, which connects the 2 of them, stage 2 and interface, and then stage 3. Then the reentry system is the tip of the spear, if you would.
So we're just talking about this now. You called this an interface or an interstage?
Well, an interface or an interstage. They're called 3 stages, so 1, 2, 3 stages. And then there's a spacer. If you can think of that, there are rockets at each one of these stages. So you can't have the rocket touching this part, so there's a spacer.
Okay, so right in here, there's nozzles.
Right.
And so this takes it up to a certain altitude, this drops away, then this goes up, and then this goes up, and then right here, this is the business end.
And if you can think of it now, and I'm going to use rough terms, it's about a minute for each burn stage.
A minute.
So a minute, the largest part is the booster. These are solid state. So when you see the term on like loaded here, that means it's a loaded weapon. It's like a big bullet with 3 different stages on it. So this ignites in the silo in the underground facility. It gets it out for about a minute. It burns. Then the spacer kicks off, and then this ignites. This goes for about a minute, and then this spacer breaks away, and then this one. Then when it's in the atmosphere, into the higher altitudes, then this reentry system, if you would, flies back into the atmosphere.
How fast?
Well, if you go from, say, the United States to Russia in less than 30 minutes, 17,000 miles a minute, 17,000, miles an hour. Yeah.
17,000 miles an hour.
Roughly, yeah. Many of the original rockets were liquid because they give you more thrust, but they're not as storable. So the Minuteman was kind of the breakthrough when you could put a missile in a silo, leave it there for unattended, and you didn't have to worry about raising an elevator, putting locks and fuels into it, and launching.
Okay.
So this can launch in 30 seconds where the others took minutes to launch. If I can just show you quickly on this one, and the launch control centers have changed a little bit, but the concept's the same. There are a lot of safeguards built into these systems, both in the missile and the reentry system, security around them, and its launch control center. This is probably anywhere from 40 to 90 feet below ground. There's 5 of these. So there are 10 officers on duty, geographically separated, 2 in each one, and then they would key turn, and then another launch control center would have to key turn at the same time to get the missiles launched.
Okay.
So no one launch control center could launch them.
So when you think about this, you've got to take a minimum of 4 people who have to agree to start nuclear war.
Yes.
How do you get people to agree? And we've talked about this mutually assured destruction. You've got to make sure that these people will do it. Because if they won't do it, the system is useless.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the way it was designed, there's a physical and then a human element in this. It would take a minimum of 2 launch control capsules to do this. You have 5 of them. So if you want to say, well, you'd have to have 2 out of 5, the odds are pretty good you could do that. But also the individuals are really, they're the ones that have the key. They're the tip of the spear, if you would.
Right.
And you're trained. And from the very first day you get into missiles, here at Vandenberg Air Force Base where the training's done, they understand what they're required to do. And some people just can't say, I couldn't do that.
Okay, how do you ensure that you have that kind of dedication and that kind of commitment to doing the unthinkable?
And that's a good way to describe it. You have to tell people you're going to do something that you never want to do, but you have to be ready to do it. You train them, they go through psychological exams, etc. You test them, evaluate them, make sure that, but until the real world happens, you never really know whether they're going to key turn. But if you understand that the only requirement, the only situation you'd ever be in is that someone's attacking your country, then you say, all right, then it's my requirement, my duty to retaliate.
When people think of the Air Force, they think of airplanes. The Missileer story, to me, is just so fantastic, but nobody seems to know it. The only thing you think about is Missileer, nuclear war, end of the world, end of discussion. Why do you think the Missileer story is so comparatively unknown, but yet it permeates every single day of our life?
First of all, we don't want to be known. We're underground. We don't ever want to use our weapon systems, but we always have to have them ready. The Air Force is very glamorous to fly, fighters and bombers, etc. Again, it's a little bit, it's unsung heroes. You don't want to hear about them, you don't want to use them, and you don't see them. Like you don't see them in parades, you don't see flyovers at the Air Force Academy games.
There's a phrase that I've heard. You call it that the ICBM missile system is the greatest weapon ever used. What does that mean to you?
Well, we take pride in that the Cold War ended, at least for a lot of reasons. But their joke is that if Russians always thought about doing something, they'd always say the Minuteman's on alert. Not today, comrade, not today. So we always say it was a weapon system that was always used, never used, because it was always on alert. Bombers came and went during Vietnam, they did other things. Submarines came and went from the ports, etc. The Minuteman missile was on alert since 1962. And I think if you talk to a missile person, they're proud of that. It's quite a weapon system.
A deterrent to aggression, ever at the ready. The Minuteman system has grown into reality.
Every morning before I go on alert, I turn on the radio. I listen first to the weather report because I live in Minot, North Dakota. And next, I listen to the date and the time because September 11th, 2001, we think 9/11. That describes the day that everything changed in America. And so every time I hear the radio and I hear the day that's announced, I think this could be the day that changes the world.
As a 22-year-old, it is humbling to think that I was responsible for 10 nuclear-capable missiles, up to 50 nuclear-capable missiles. I don't know many people other than my missileer friends that have that level of responsibility.
There is no other job in the world that gives responsibility of 50 missiles to a 22, 23, 25-year-old. That shows how much the Air Force really trusts what we do.
I'd rather try to turn keys and protect the rest of America that we will have, because we'll do it. I mean, it's kind of ingrained. If I see that message, I'm not really gonna think. I'm gonna act and do my job. And my job is to turn keys if the president says so.
If I am called to key turn, and I'm here, I know that I will, because that means that things have escalated so far that the direction is coming from the president, and I want to defend my country. I want to serve my country.
One more anecdote about growing up in the Upper Plains. One of the first heroes we learned about in school was President Teddy Roosevelt. I still hope we're learning about President Teddy Roosevelt in school. But he had an interesting quote about his foreign policy, and I'd like to read it. It's the exercise of intelligent forethought and of decisive action sufficiently far in advance of any likely crisis. That's a lot of words, and it's not very clear. However, later on, President Roosevelt repurposed an African proverb that said it much better. Walk softly, but carry a big stick.